Night in London knows how to lie beautifully. It can take a scandal, wrap it in perfume and fog, and sell it back to the city as romance. On this night, however, it had chosen to be merciful. Just one sliver of moonlight, one carriage without a crest, and two hearts walking into sin disguised as ceremony. The Duke of Keswick, Julian Ashbourne, 28 years old, heir to 3 counties and an empire of expectation, waited beneath the modest arch of St. Gabriel's Chapel. His gloves were still damp from rain, and so was his courage. Every clock in the city conspired to remind him that time was misbehaving. She was late. When Isabel March appeared at last, the air changed. She wore no jewels, no veil, no audience, only a simple gown the color of calm skies and a shawl that smelled faintly of lavender. She paused at the doorway, her chest rising with the fragile defiance of a woman about to rewrite her life. "You came," he said, almost reverent. "I promised," she replied, "and I do not break promises, even the foolish ones." He took her hand, gloved and trembling, and kissed it. "If it is foolish, it is the only wisdom I have left." The rector, a weary man of 50 with a voice like unpolished wood, stood waiting. He did not ask for witnesses. Perhaps he had long ago learned that love prefers privacy to legitimacy. The rain outside kept time against the windows while 2 people tried to outwit destiny. When the vows began, Isabel's voice was steady. "I take thee," she said, and the words fell like warm drops on cold stone. Julian's response came rough, uneven, like a confession forced from a proud man at last. "I take thee." No music, no applause, only the echo of forever, spoken by 2 souls who suspected it might not last till dawn. When the rector left, blessing them with half a smile and a full understanding of consequences, they were alone. Julian stood still, afraid to breathe in case the night ended. "It is done," she whispered. "We are husband and wife." "Yes," he said softly, "and I am already guilty of wanting the morning never to come." The candles bent in approval as they drew close. There was hesitation at first, a tremor in his hand, a question in her eyes. But love is impatient with timidity. His lips met hers, and the world folded. They forgot who they were. He was no longer the Duke, she, no longer the scholar's daughter. They were just man and woman, aching, hungry, alive. The rain turned to applause on the glass as he lifted her veil and discovered that devotion looks most dangerous when it finally feels safe. "Tell me this is not madness," he whispered between kisses. "It is," she said, smiling against his mouth, "but it's our kind." Hours passed unnoticed. They spoke in half sentences, laughter breaking between sighs, secrets shared like stolen bread. She told him about her father, the quiet man who had died poor but honest. He told her about his mother, the woman who ruled with her reputation and planned to buy him a duchess, not a love. "When she finds out," Isabel murmured, "she will despise me." "She despises everyone," he replied. "You will be in good company." They laughed softly, the sound of conspirators in love. But dawn is merciless. It crawled through the curtains with all the subtlety of a judge. Outside, carriages began to rattle, servants began to stir, and the world, eager to resume its gossip, cleared its throat. Julian watched her sleeping. A single curl rested against her cheek, and in that instant he understood what eternity truly meant, not endless time, but a single perfect memory that refuses to die. He bent, pressed his lips to her forehead, and whispered, "Whatever happens, remember this. For one night, you were loved without limit." She opened her eyes. "For one night," she said quietly, "and for a lifetime after, if you are brave enough." He smiled. "I am brave enough for both of us." Then came the knock, soft but deadly. The voice of his valet filtered through the door. "Your Grace, the Duchess Dowager requests your presence immediately." The word grace was a blade. Julian froze. "Not yet," he muttered. "Tell her." "Tell her what?" Isabel asked gently, sitting up. "That you've disobeyed her? That you've shamed the family? You can't. She will destroy us." He turned toward her, frantic. Then I'll tell the truth. I'll tell her I married you, that I love you, that—" "No," she interrupted, firm but kind. "If you say it now, she'll take everything. You'll lose your title, your name. I won't be the reason a good man becomes a beggar." He knelt by the bed. "I would trade every acre I own for another hour with you." "And I would give that hour back," she whispered, "if it meant you could keep what the world expects from you." Their last kiss was desperate and tender all at once, the way people kiss when they already feel the pull of eternity. He dressed quickly, each layer of velvet turning him back into someone she could not touch. At the door, he paused. "I'll find you," he said. "I swear it." "I hope you don't," she replied, "because if you do, it means neither of us learned anything." He looked back only once, enough to memorize her silhouette against the dying fire. By midday, the Dowager Duchess had learned the truth and done what powerful people always do: rewrite history. The marriage was declared invalid, the rector bribed into forgetfulness, and the girl dismissed with a purse full of guilt she refused to spend. When the carriage carried her away, Isabel did not cry. She watched the sky instead, muttering the vow she had whispered under her breath as he kissed her hand. "I will not let this night be a ruin. I will make it a beginning." That evening, Julian found her glove on the bed where she had slept. He lifted it to his lips, the lavender, scent piercing him like memory-made perfume. Sitting at his desk, he wrote, "My heart, I was your husband for one night, and I will be your shadow for the rest of my life. If the world has stolen you, I shall spend every sunrise stealing you back from memory." He sealed it, but he never sent it. Some love letters are meant not for posting, but for survival. Scandal travels faster than carriages. By the time Isabel March's modest trunk reached the edge of London, the whispers had already arrived, trimmed and sharpened for polite conversation. Drawing rooms hummed with conjecture. The Duke of Keswick had eloped. The girl was a temptress, a governess, a thief of lineage. No one knew the truth, and fewer cared. Society never feasts better than when it eats the innocent. Isabel's carriage stopped on a gray street near Holborn. She stepped out wearing a shawl instead of pride. The air smelled of coal and compromise. In her hand, she carried a letter from the Dowager, 2 sentences long and heavy as a verdict. "You will find an allowance enclosed. Consider this silence purchased. Do not write to my son." She folded the letter neatly, burned it, and used the flame to light her single candle. "There," she murmured, "paid in full." She rented 2 rooms above a bookbinder's shop, a narrow space with a slanted roof, a leaking window, and a stubborn sense of safety. To her landlord, she introduced herself as Mrs. Marchwood, a seamstress recently widowed. Lies, she found, were cheaper than pity. She began mending clothes for clerks and tradesmen, her fingers learning the language of thread and survival. The nights were longer than the workdays. Sometimes she would pause mid-stitch, realizing her hands were shaking, not from fatigue, but from remembering the warmth of his. Meanwhile, the Duke lived among marble and mirrors and could not find himself in either. His mother believed the matter concluded. "It was a lapse," she said. "Time will tidy it." But time, as Julian discovered, is a poor servant when love refuses dismissal. He went through the motions of nobility, attending dinners, signing contracts, hosting hunts, but every act felt counterfeit, a man's imitation of living. He drank, at first to sleep, and later to forget that he couldn't. The glove she had left behind stayed in his drawer, wrapped in linen like a relic. Some nights, when brandy loosened his restraint, he would press it to his face and whisper to the ghost it carried. "One night," he would murmur. "Only one, and the world ended there." The Dowager tried to repair his reputation by arranging a marriage. "Lady Henrietta has 40,000 a year, and no opinions," she said briskly. "Perfect ingredients for peace." Julian laughed without humor. "Then marry her yourself, mother. You seem to appreciate her virtues." The Dowager froze, wounded less by the words than by the emotion behind them. "You're behaving as though she bewitched you." "She did nothing but exist," he said, "and that was enough." He left before the argument could become inheritance. In the weeks that followed, he began searching for Isabel quietly. Too proud for scandal, too desperate for sense. He sent inquiries through trusted servants, wrote to London's parishes, and bribed half the postmasters south of Oxford. Every letter returned the same silence. It was as though the earth itself had swallowed her. And perhaps it had, for Isabel's world had shrunk to a few square feet of solitude. She rose before dawn, lit her lamp, and worked until the city's noise began. London was cruel but consistent. It demanded effort, not identity. Her small reputation grew. Ladies from neighboring streets sent ribbons and torn gowns, and she mended them so delicately that gossip began calling her the seamstress of secrets. Sometimes, when her candle flickered, she would pause and whisper the words he'd said that last morning. "I'll find you." Then she would shake her head and return to her stitching. "Not if I find myself first," she'd whisper. Her solace became a small lending library she discovered near Covent Garden. The owner, a kindly widower with spectacles always sliding down his nose, noticed her eyes lingering on the poetry shelves. "You read, Mrs. Marchwood?" "I used to," she said softly, "before I forgot how to live inside words." "Then remember," he said, placing a thin volume in her hand. Wordsworth. She carried it home like medicine. Each night she read aloud to herself, her voice returning slowly like a melody long unsung. The verses reminded her that solitude could be holy if one learned how to inhabit it. Back in Keswick, Julian's solitude took a darker form. He visited their chapel one evening in disguise, cloak pulled high. The pews still smelled faintly of wax and betrayal. He knelt, placed a small bouquet of white roses where she had stood, and whispered, "If prayer has ears, take me back to that night, just once more." But prayers that beg for repetition are rarely answered. Instead, fate gave him memory, sharp, loyal, merciless. Years passed, disguised as days. The Duke's friends noticed the change. He no longer hunted, no longer flirted, no longer laughed without apology. "Ashbourne has turned monk," they said, misunderstanding the devotion that kept him alive. And Isabel? She became invisible and invincible in equal measure. Poverty, it turned out, is an excellent tutor in discipline. She learned to speak little and listen much. Her customers trusted her with more than their garments, secrets, affairs, and confessions. In the city's undercurrent, she discovered that love is not always grand. Sometimes it's just the refusal to become bitter. One evening, as she walked home under a street lamp, a carriage passed by. Black lacquer, gold trim, unmistakable. Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, she saw him through the glass, profile stern, eyes fixed, forward, unaware that his universe had just passed within reach. She froze, torn between running and calling out, but by the time she decided, the carriage had vanished into fog. She pressed her hand to her chest and laughed softly, a sound half joy, half grief. "So, Julian," she whispered, "you found me after all, just not enough to know it." Back in his townhouse at the exact same hour, Julian paused mid-sentence at his desk, struck by a sudden shiver of awareness, an unprovoked certainty that somewhere, someone had spoken his name with tenderness. He looked up from his papers, bewildered. The candle flickered once and steadied. He exhaled slowly. "Perhaps I imagined it," he said. But his heart disagreed, and so the distance between them continued. One city, one chance, one heartbeat too far apart. Years do not pass so much as practice. They rehearse us into the people we claim we mean to be. Julian Ashbourne rehearsed repentance until it looked like a life. He stopped hunting kills and began hunting good. He discovered that endowments could be written like apologies, and that receipts, signed without spectacle, can be love letters addressed to the world. He endowed scholarships in the name of forgotten scholars, purchased a small press to birth little books that could travel where dukes could not, and began to appear in rooms that smelled of ink instead of port. London called it eccentricity. He called it oxygen. He bought a cottage on the Dorset coast, the one he had once promised out loud and later in silence. He furnished it with sturdy chairs and a table that invited bread, and then visited only long enough to make the rooms memorize the sound of his steps. On the mantel, he placed a small painting of a window open to sea. "One day," he told the empty air, "this will stop being rehearsal." The tide, which forgives more than churches do, applauded. The glove remained in his drawer, wrapped in linen like a relic that refused superstition. In the early years, he pressed it to his face, as though memory were a scent one could reapply. Later, he simply touched the hem with 2 fingers before leaving for the day, the way men salute flags they hope to deserve. He made himself inconvenient to the right people. When a factory owner proposed employing girls for 14 hours, because they are small and therefore economical, Julian leaned across a polished table and said, in a tone that did not require volume, "Economical cruelty is still cruelty." When a committee suggested that literacy was wasted on laundresses, he purchased 10 washtubs for the schoolhouse and dared the city to call it satire. The joke, it turned out, was on the illiterate. His friends shrank by attrition. 2 remained, Lord Finch, whose sarcasm had grown wise, and a barrister named Hartwell, whose belief in the law resembled faith and whose patience with dukes resembled none. "You are building the architecture of a man you think she would choose," Hartwell observed one evening, as they walked after a meeting that had just argued a chimney into mercy. "Am I?" Julian asked, not refusing the diagnosis. "Then let it be a house where the door is always open, even if she prefers never to knock." He dreamed of her not as a figure bathed in moonlight, but as a presence performing ordinary miracles. A hand smoothing a page, a voice reading a line, a laugh that corrected the room without humiliating it. Obsession, he discovered, could be sanctified by utility. If he could not have the woman, he would have the world she had taught him to love. Isabel's years were quieter and no less stubborn. The name Mrs. Marchwood, the widowed seamstress with no history but plenty of thread, grew respectably famous across 3 parishes. She mended without asking questions, and, when asked questions, replied in the grammar of usefulness, "Tomorrow by noon. This hem will prefer handwork. Yes, it will bear another winter." She saved coins in a tin marked books and others in a tin marked escape, and then, when escape proved to be the home she had already made, she spent both on a taller lamp. The widow of the ribbon shop, Mrs. Crewe, became her friend and accomplice. "You mend everything," Mrs. Crewe said once, adjusting spectacles that had learned to be brave. "Gowns, grief, grammar. If I find a torn sky, I'll bring it to you." "Charge extra," Isabel answered, smiling. "Skies fray more than silk." The lending library near Covent Garden eventually became more than refuge. It became routine. Mr. Bell, the proprietor with the perpetually surprised spectacles, learned to set aside slim volumes of verse and essays about coal and Parliament. "You are the only customer who returns pamphlets with gratitude," he told her. "Most return them with tomato stains." Sometimes she read aloud to a knot of children who preferred stories to arithmetic. Sometimes she stitched while listening to a lecture in the back room on sanitation, Greek roots, or the peculiar bravery of midwives. Each small evening placed one more brick in the house of the self she could live in. Fate is made not only of thunderclaps, but of clerks. One winter, a clerk in the office of a philanthropic trust decided that London needed reading rooms at street level, places where laundresses and clerks could trade exhaustion for sentences that did not scold. The trust needed a public face with money and a private conscience with stamina. The public face became the Duke of Keswick by acclamation and a nudge from Hartwell. The private conscience had to be found. Mr. Bell, who disliked committees and loved solutions, wrote a letter in his tidy hand. "Mrs. Marchwood, seamstress and mender, is the most reliable mind I know. She can shelve, soothe, and silence a room in 5 minutes without raising her voice. Hire her, or you deserve the dust you'll collect instead of readers." He sent it. The committee, astonished by such clarity, obeyed. Isabel received the invitation with the shock of a woman asked to breathe as a career. "Manager of the Bell Street Reading Room," the letter read. "Hours, modest. Salary, honest. Mission, immodest." She stood very still and listened for the sound of her own heart. It hummed like a kettle prepared to be useful. She said yes without asking permission of fear. On the morning the reading room opened, the city cooperated with sunshine. The door, a cheerful blue, stood ajar. Inside waited shelves at human height, a narrow table for newspapers that would wrinkle under tea, a cabinet labeled "Repair" because Mr. Bell had sense, and chairs that did not punish sitting. A brass plaque above the door read simply, "Bell Street Reading Room, a gift from friends who know words are food." By 10 o'clock, the place had become a rehearsal of the nation it wanted to belong to: dock workers and dressmakers, a boy who sold matches and devoured maps, a widow who read the Psalms as if bracing a wall. Isabel moved among them like a conductor of quiet. "You'll prefer the window," she told the anxious. "Try this shelf," she told the proud. To the child who refused to sit, "Stand then. Some sentences are better that way." At noon, Mrs. Crewe arrived with a basket of buns and a grin. "Look at you," she said, arms wide, "a queen with a kingdom that smells of paper." Isabel laughed, a sound that made the room believe in tomorrow. She did not see Mr. Bell slip to the door where a discreet card had been hung. Patrons visit at 2. She did not ask who the patron was. Patrons came and went. She had buns to distribute and a map to find for the boy who wanted to stand. Julian learned about the opening the way dukes learn about everything that matters, from a servant more devoted to his happiness than to protocol. Ellis placed the circular upon his desk. "The first of the new reading rooms, Your Grace, Bell Street. The manager is a Mrs. Marchwood." Julian's pen hesitated above a signature. The name struck him like the softest blow, a rumor the heart believed before the head could analyze. "Marchwood," he repeated, tasting the syllables for counterfeit. "Yes, Your Grace," Ellis said evenly. "A widow, competent." "Competency is seductive," Julian murmured, staring through the window as if truth might be strolling by with a newspaper. 2 o'clock? 2, Ellis confirmed, already moving toward the door to arrange a carriage that would look as if it were running an errand rather than escorting a man toward a quake. He almost did not go. The mind, chief of cowards, warned that hope is a currency with predatory interest, but the body, apprenticed to longing for too long to be reasoned with, stood, fetched his coat, and refused to consider bravery optional. He told himself he would stand at the back, nod at the librarian, donate a shelf, and leave. He told himself many things he did not intend to keep. At 10 minutes to 2, the reading room smelled of paper and buns and the invention of safety. Isabel straightened the stack of newspapers, moved a chair an inch, comfort can be calibrated, and smoothed the banner Mr. Bell had insisted upon. "Words are food. Take seconds." Her hair was pinned without vanity, her dress simple and clean, her expression the kind cities learn to trust. A child tugged her sleeve. "Miss, do you have stories about oceans?" "Always," she said, leading him toward a map as if offering bread. Across town, Julian's carriage turned from the main thoroughfare into Bell Street, lamps bright in afternoon habit, wheels respectful of puddles. He sat forward, not trusting posture with this much history. When the horses slowed, he saw, through glass and reflection, a door painted cheerful blue, a small crowd within, a banner that made his mouth remember how to be gentle. He paid the driver not to wait. Inside, the air altered him. It had the temperature of belonging. He removed his hat because words are a church, and paused at the threshold to let the room learn his size before he tried to move inside it. No one looked up. Miracle of a place that refused to fear titles. He saw the cabinet labeled repair and smiled without knowing. He watched as a woman in a simple dress placed a book into a pair of hesitant hands and gave instructions on standing to read when a chair might confuse a story. He did not yet see her face. He saw competence shaped into kindness and felt the years shift upon their hinges. "Sir?" Mr. Bell materialized like good coincidence. "You are our patron, I think. Thank you for your timing. Will you permit me to introduce our manager?" Julian's mouth forgot how to lie. "If you please," he said, each word rehearsed by a decade. Isabel turned at the sound of her name. The room, buns, maps, widows, children, banners, remained steady as fate performed its least theatrical trick, delivering two people to the same square of air. Her eyes, amber and exact, widened by a fraction. His breath, trained to obey him in committee rooms and chapels, took a holiday. Neither spoke. There is a silence designed for shock, and another designed for worship. This was both. She did not faint. He did not advance. Somewhere a child announced triumphantly that oceans have names. The clock above the door ticked with the impudence of objects that do not know they are witnessing history. Mr. Bell, newly wise, retreated into the stacks and began rearranging pamphlets that did not require rearranging. "Good afternoon," Isabel said at last, in the voice of a woman who has practiced mastery of rooms in which men arrive. He answered with the only doctrine devotion had left him. Good afternoon. The glove in the drawer at Grosvenor Square, half a city away, remembered to exist. Outside, the street shrugged into sunlight. Inside, two people remembered night and began, without agreeing, to learning the grammar of day. Silence, when shared by two people who remember everything, can feel heavier than confession. The reading room was nearly empty now. The crowd had thinned into echoes and crumbs. Children had gone home. The air smelled of dust and buns, and outside, dusk rehearsed its entrance. Isabel stacked the last of the returned books, steady hands, steady breath, and listened to the heartbeat she could hear even from across the room. Julian remained near the door, hat in hand, the picture of self-command, but the way his fingers trembled on the brim betrayed him. He looked older, not ruined, but refined by suffering, as though grief had been polishing him for this moment. His hair carried a touch of gray, the kind that suits repentance. When she finally turned to face him fully, the air between them remembered everything it had ever been asked to forget. "I did not imagine it would be you," she said softly. "Nor I you," he replied, his voice low enough to make the lamps lean closer. "I came here expecting only to see what your work had built. Instead, I find the architect." She smiled faintly. "And what do you think of the structure, Your Grace?" He winced. "Do not call me that, not here, not from you." "Forgive me. Habit. The world insists on naming us by the cages we escaped." Julian took a careful step forward. "You escaped. I merely paced mine until I learned the pattern of the bars." The truth of it hung between them, heavy, unadorned. She gestured toward a chair. "You can sit if you mean to stay." He did not sit. "I've been sitting for 10 years, he said. "Allow me to stand while I am permitted to breathe the same air as you." She busied herself with a stack of children's primers. "The air is not mine to give." "No, but once, for one night, you gave me everything else." Her hands faltered just once, just enough for him to see the tremor she fought down. "That night is older than memory," she said. "For me it's younger than tomorrow," he replied. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was sacred, dangerous, charged with every word they had never written. She turned at last, calm but trembling underneath it. "Why are you here, Julian? To ease your conscience? To be certain that I survived your leaving?" He looked at her then, as if looking could undo history. "I came because I could no longer bear to worship in absence. I needed to know if the woman I loved still existed outside of memory. And if she didn't? Then I would have built her from what remained of me." Her breath caught, but she covered it with a small, weary laugh. "You always did believe creation was your privilege." He smiled, wounded. "And you always believed forgiveness was yours." "I forgave you long ago," she said, almost too quietly. "It was necessary for breathing. But forgiving isn't forgetting, Julian. I remember everything. The vows, the morning, the knock, the silence that came after." He took a step closer. "I wrote you letters, hundreds, none posted. I thought if I wrote enough, perhaps the universe would deliver one by pity." "Letters are cowardly," she said. "They ask for mercy from distance." "Yes," he smiled faintly. "That's why I'm here now, unarmed, unmailed, unforgiven." Her gaze softened despite itself. "You have changed." "I had to. Obsession is not a life, it's a lesson. You were the teacher." "And what did the lesson cost?" "Everything that wasn't you." The lamps hissed. The air between them grew intimate with dusk. She looked away first toward the shelves where children had left fingerprints. "I am not the same woman you married for one night." "I know," he said. "That's why I came. To meet the woman you became when I was not allowed to." The words cracked something inside her she had sworn to protect. "You destroyed me." "I know. And you would do it again?" "If it meant finding you at the end of it, yes." She shook her head, tears threatening mutiny. "You speak like a man who has never truly suffered loss." He took another step, close enough now that she could smell the faint salt of the sea on him. "I speak like a man who lost everything and discovered that only one thing mattered enough to miss." Her defenses faltered. She looked up, meeting his eyes fully for the first time since that night. There they were, the same blue, only tempered now by regret. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "Nothing," he said. "And everything. A conversation, a beginning, a kindness. I don't ask for love, I just ask not to be erased." Her lip trembled. "You were never erased. I just learned to live in the margins." He smiled, half broken, half grateful. "Then let me read there with you." Something in her gave way. The years of solitude, the stitched seams of self-sufficiency, all began to loosen. "You cannot stay," she said, voice unsteady. "People will talk. Let them. I have been their subject for too long. Let the city remember me for something true." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small envelope, yellowed by time. "This was meant for you, the morning after, the letter I never posted." She hesitated, then took it. The seal cracked like old bones. Inside, 3 lines written in his unmistakable hand. "If the world forbids you to bear my name, then let it at least bear witness that I was yours once, and willingly." Tears came silently. "You kept this?" she asked. "I kept everything." She folded the letter carefully, as if folding a wound closed. "And now?" "Now," he said softly, "I will come tomorrow. As a patron, as a reader, as anything you permit. I will earn the right to stand here as if the world didn't ruin us." She nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, then, but you must promise one thing." "No, anything." "Do not bring the past with you. It takes up too much space." He smiled sadly. "I'll leave it outside with the carriage." When he left, the door chimed softly, an ordinary sound that made her heart misbehave. She stood alone again, the letter trembling in her hand, and for the first time in 10 years, she whispered his name without anger. Outside, the Duke paused on the steps, eyes lifted to the lamp in the window that burned still, stubborn as her. He smiled. "Tomorrow," he murmured. "I'll learn to deserve that light." He came back the next day, and the day after that, and the one after that too, always at the same hour, never announced, never demanding. The Bell Street reading room began to adjust its rhythm to his arrival. Children grew used to the tall man who moved between shelves without disturbing dust. The widows and apprentices whispered theories, then grew bored when scandal refused to appear. To them, he was just the quiet patron with kind eyes and a limp of the soul. Julian never entered empty-handed. Sometimes he brought new books, volumes of poetry or pamphlets on science that spoke to progress and empathy. Sometimes it was donations for repairs or a loaf of bread wrapped in brown paper for the widows. And sometimes, when the courage in him outweighed the guilt, he brought nothing but his company and the sincerity that needed no ornament. Isabel learned the pattern quickly, though she pretended not to. At first she treated him as any other guest, cordial, efficient, professional. But the room itself began conspiring against formality. The moments between their exchanges grew longer. She found herself expecting his footsteps the way a piano expects music. One afternoon, a sudden storm chased the readers away early. Rain lashed against the windows with impatient fingers, and the two of them were left alone in the flickering lamplight. She was folding blankets when he spoke from across the room. "You should lock up soon." "I will," she said without looking up, "when the rain stops." He smiled faintly. "Then I hope it lasts forever." She glanced at him, eyes narrowing, but there was warmth there too. "Careful, Your Grace. You once wished for forever, and it didn't end well." He laughed quietly, a sound she had missed without knowing it. "You remember." "I remember everything," she said. "That's both the blessing and the curse of being a woman who listens too well." Julian stepped closer. "And do you remember happiness?" She hesitated. "Sometimes. But memory makes even joy ache." "Then perhaps it's time for new memories." She shook her head. "I built this life so I could live without waiting for the next wound." "Then let me be the scar that doesn't hurt anymore." His words stole the air from the room. The rain outside softened, as if listening. She stared at him. 10 years of pain meeting 10 years of devotion, and for a heartbeat, she almost believed him. But belief is fragile when you've had to build yourself from the rubble of disappointment. "Julian," she said softly, "you can't fix me." He smiled sadly. "No, Isabel. I only mean to stand beside what you've already repaired." That disarmed her. She looked down at her hands, rougher now, stronger. "You speak like a man who's learned humility." He nodded. "You were the lesson." Their silences grew more comfortable after that. He began helping with the reading room, fixing a broken shelf, cleaning the fireplace, repairing a door hinge. Sometimes he would sit quietly and read aloud to children when her voice grew hoarse. The little ones adored him, not for his title but for his patience. They climbed on his lap, played with his watch chain, and called him Mr. Duke, which made him laugh until he cried. Isabel would watch from the desk, a strange mixture of warmth and fear blooming in her chest. He was dangerous like peace, too good, too steady, too tempting to trust completely. Rumors, of course, began again. The city's appetite for stories never dies, it merely waits for new seasoning. "The Duke of Keswick spends hours in Holborn," they whispered. "He's either lost his mind or found it in a seamstress's lap." The dowager's old allies rolled their eyes, and society sharpened its quills for another scandal. But Julian refused to play the part expected of him. When confronted at a dinner by a smirking lord who hinted about charitable fascinations, Julian met his gaze with calm steel. "You mistake obsession for atonement," he said, "and that says more about your experience than mine." The gossip faded quickly. No one mocks a man who has learned to own his sins. Winter arrived, crisp and merciless. The reading room struggled to stay warm, and Isabel, too proud to ask for help, worked twice as long to afford coal. One evening, when she arrived before dawn, she found the hearth already lit, and fresh firewood stacked neatly beside it. On the table sat a folded note. "Warmth should not be earned, Isabel. Some things exist simply because the world is kinder than we expect. J." She smiled despite herself, tracing the letter J with her fingertip. "Still the poet," she whispered. Later that week she invited him to tea. It was a small surrender, wrapped in civility. He accepted as though the invitation were royal decree. The tea was modest, the biscuits plain, but their conversation carried the richness of a decade postponed. "Do you ever wish," he asked quietly, "that we had defied them all, that we had run away?" She poured the tea carefully. "Once, yes, but then I realized that running would have turned love into rebellion. It would have killed it faster." He nodded. "And yet here it is, alive, stubborn, unreasonable." She looked at him then, fully, without armor. "Do you still love me?" "Yes," he said simply, "but not the way I did. Before. Then it was possession. Now it's reverence." Her throat tightened. "And what if reverence isn't enough? Then I'll wait until it becomes devotion again." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they did not hurt. They felt like spring after a long frost. "You waited 10 years, she whispered. "Haven't you done enough?" He smiled. "There is no enough when the waiting is the love." They sat in silence again, listening to the clock tick, both knowing that something fragile had been reborn in the space between heartbeats. The tea grew cold, but neither of them moved to pour more. Some warmth, once earned, refuses to fade. Spring, when it finally came, arrived as if apologizing for its lateness. London's soot softened into blossom dust, and the Bell Street reading room bloomed with noise and laughter. 10 years of waiting had taught both Isabel and Julian that happiness does not always trumpet its return. It often slips in through unlocked doors and sits quietly, asking only to be noticed. He came to the reading room less like a visitor now and more like a presence that belonged. Sometimes he read aloud to children, sometimes he helped Mrs. Crewe hang new curtains, sometimes he merely watched Isabel move through her work, her grace, her certainty, the ease of her laughter. There was no grand romance in those hours, no theatrics. Yet to him, every breath she took inside that room felt like a hymn his soul had been waiting to sing. He never pressed her, never begged for what he'd once stolen by fate. He simply stayed. And it was in that steadfast silence that she began to see what had changed. The boy who had once called himself Duke had grown into a man who understood service. It made her love him again, slowly, unwillingly, and at last without fear. One evening, long after the readers had gone, she found him still there, sitting by the fire, staring at a torn page he was carefully mending. "You've grown good at repair," she said softly from behind him. He looked up, smiling faintly. "You taught me. Patience, thread, and truth. Those are your inventions." She walked closer, resting a hand on the back of his chair. "And what, may I ask, are you mending this time?" He held up the page. It was from a book of poetry. The verse read, "I have learned to love the things I cannot keep, for they return to me changed and kinder." Isabel sank into the chair beside him. "And do you believe that?" "I do now," he said, meeting her eyes, "because you're here." The firelight painted them in gold. She looked at him for a long while, her heart whispering what her voice did not dare. Finally she spoke. "Julian, why did you never remarry?" He smiled a little tiredly. "Because you are not the kind of wound that can be replaced. I tried once, almost. But every woman I met reminded me that I was still waiting for you." Her breath trembled. "And if I hadn't survived, then I would have spent my life writing your name into every kindness I could find." The tears came quietly. She tried to look away, but he reached out, his hand stopping just short of hers. "May I?" he asked. She nodded. His fingers closed around hers, their first touch in 10 years, and it felt less like possession and more like homecoming. The air seemed to sigh in relief around them. "I don't know what forgiveness looks like," he said softly, "but I've been building my life to fit inside it." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead lightly to his. "Then stop building, Julian. You're already there." For a long while, neither spoke. The fire crackled, the night deepened, and the clock on the wall recorded a history more honest than any sermon. When she finally pulled back, she smiled through tears. "Come tomorrow at noon," she said. "The rector of St. Gabriel's is still alive. I think he deserves a better ending to our story." He froze, searching her face for jest. "Isabel." "Yes," she said simply. "We'll go together this time. In daylight. No secrets, no shame." His eyes closed, a prayer escaping as breath. "I don't deserve this." She touched his cheek, firm but tender. "Love isn't about deserving, Julian. It's about daring again." The next day, the chapel was smaller than memory had made it. The same cracked windows, the same worn pews, the same tired rector. Older, slower, but with the same faint smile of a man who has seen love return in every possible disguise. When they entered, Julian's hand trembled in hers, but she held it steady. The rector looked between them, recognition dawning slowly like dawn over stone. "Ah," he said at last, "so the story returns to be rewritten." Julian bowed his head. "If you will permit us, Father, once more, but this time without fear." The rector nodded. "Then let heaven hear what the world once denied." There were no witnesses, no carriages, no silks or jewels. Only two people, older and quieter, promising what they had already proven, that love can survive even its own ending. When he placed the ring upon her finger, his mother's ring, polished and simple, he whispered, "Not for one night, for every night that remains." And she answered, "Not as a secret, as a choice." They left the chapel hand in hand, walking into sunlight that did not apologize for anything. London, ever curious, turned to look and then lost interest, the scandal too old to revive, the happiness too modest to mock. They returned to Bell Street, where Mrs. Crewe had prepared tea and the children had drawn a banner with crooked letters, "Happily ever after, we think." That evening, as the day folded itself neatly into night, Isabel stood by the window of the reading room, looking out at the lamplight spreading like gentle fire. Julian came up behind her, resting his hand over hers on the sill. "Do you think it will last this time?" he asked, softly. She smiled. "It doesn't have to. Forever isn't the point, Julian. The point is now, and we finally have one." He kissed her temple, breathing in the lavender that still clung to her hair. "Then let this be our always." Outside, a bell rang, the sound clear, unhurried, and free. Inside, two souls, once broken, fit perfectly together again. The world did not notice. It didn't need to. Because love, when it has survived fire and silence and time, no longer needs an audience. It just needs to stay.